Hello and welcome to Life I Design, the podcast, where we explore the art and science of crafting a life that truly reflects who you are and who you want to become. I'm Nicki Traikos, author, educator, and artist, and your guide on this journey of intentional living, art, entrepreneurship, and personal growth. In each episode, we dive into thought-provoking conversations while I bring in experts, innovators, and everyday people who are redefining what it means to live a fulfilling and purpose-driven life. From mastering mindset and setting meaningful goals to embracing creativity and overcoming obstacles, we cover it all to help you design a life that is uniquely yours. Whether you're looking to make a major life change or simply seeking inspiration to enhance your daily routine, Life I Design is here to provide you with the tools, insights, and motivation you need to start building the life you've always dreamed of. So get ready to challenge your thinking, ignite your passion, and take actionable steps toward a life you love. Let's embark on this transformative journey together. Thank you for tuning in. Now let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to Life I Design, the podcast. I'm Nicki, and today we're diving into a topic that's really close to my heart. How to start a daily painting routine. So whether you're a seasoned artist or a curious beginner, establishing a daily practice can be incredibly rewarding, but sometimes challenging. So I'm going to share with you today my personal journey, some practical tips and insights on how to paint every day and how painting every day can really transform your life. So painting every day hasn't been something that I've been able to do for a long time. It really is something that I've just only recently been able to dive into. I don't know if you're familiar with the 100-day project. It was started years ago as a way to help artists really get creative every day and do something creative every day. For years, I tried, and I really did try my best. I did things like create an ink drawing every day or letter a word every day. One year, I even lettered the alphabet. I chose one letter, so let's say the letter A, and I maybe wrote it 50 different ways. That's when I was really doing lettering and calligraphy in my artwork. It wasn't until last year when I embraced a challenge that was a bit easier to do, easier for me to manage every day from a time perspective. It was something I was really passionate about and one thing that I wanted to grow in my own personal art practice. And that was working on portraits. I wanted to be really good and quick at drawing portraits and painting portraits. So I made the process easy. I made it digestible so that if I only had 10 minutes to paint or sketch that day, I could do it. And I have to say, I learned so much from being consistent in my practice, working on my portrait skills daily, and making it easy to sit down and create. So I'm going to share a bunch of tips with you, but if you are looking to improve your art skills and really enjoy your art practice and benefit from it and have it really transform your daily life, then sit back and let's get started. Okay, so let's start by discussing why a daily practice routine is important. So, daily practice is a game changer. I don't know if you've read the book Atomic Habits. I think it's James Clear. I'll link it in the show notes, but that book really made me think about all the different things in my life that I wanted to improve on. And I knew that I had the control to improve as well. And it's all about how consistency leads to improvement. So think about if you maybe are on a fitness regime and you want to improve your physical health. Going to the gym for 1 hour once a week isn't going to cut it. But going to the gym 3 times a week for 20 minutes will. It will give you more muscle memory. It will give you an opportunity to create more strength and cardiovascular health. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physical therapist, but Having that consistency will lead to improvement. It's the same thing with your art practice. If you sit down and watercolor paint for an hour on a Saturday, but don't pick up your paintbrush again for another 2 weeks, you're going to be rusty. Your muscle memory won't be the same. You will, won't even be confident with what colors to use or what imagery to use because you're going to be cold. Think of it as your muscles before you start working out. You need to warm them up. And that takes time and it takes consistent practice. So, regular practice not only hones in on technique, but it also opens the doors to creativity and lets that creativity flow. And it truly does affect your painting style, your painting confidence, and even that muscle memory that we all want to build when it comes to painting. So, when you paint daily, you build that muscle memory, which helps you express yourself more freely. Okay, so it's just going to come back more quickly if you practice every day, even if it's just 10 minutes a day. And I'll talk to you about how to set up your watercolor desk so that you can sit down to paint versus having to gather all your supplies and figure out what you need and go through all of your, I'm sure if you're anything like me, all of your many containers of paint and brushes and paper. So, daily painting isn't just about skill. There are other benefits that I want to talk about. Painting can be a form of mindfulness. It's a way to quiet the noise of the world around us, especially if you're someone like me who's a little bit more sensitive to maybe even clutter or sounds or the everyday stresses. There have been many studies showing that engaging in a creative activity like painting can significantly reduce stress and anxiety. I know when I paint, I find a sense of peace, and that's hard to replicate elsewhere, unless, of course, I'm going for a hike in the forest and enjoying a bit of nature. I feel like that's when I feel that same sense of calm and peace as well. Think of it as an act of self expression that allows us to process our emotions and experiences. And even if there are things that are happening in your life that you maybe can't control, the one thing that you can control is your painting practice. And in the moment, even if you're just maybe swatching colors, you're in control of how you move the brush, what color you're using, and you can enjoy and really lean into that tactile experience of just working on paper and watching the watercolor paint flow. We really are lucky to have that tactile expression that we can lean into and really sit and enjoy. Oftentimes, when I'm sitting down to paint, I don't listen to anything. I don't play music. Sometimes I'll put on a podcast or have something play in the background if I'm feeling a little bit more energetic. But if I'm using my paint practice to just maybe have a mindful moment and to ground myself, I just allow the sound and the experience of what I'm doing to really fill me up. And I don't want any distractions in that moment. Okay, so let's talk about setting up your painting space. Creating an inspiring environment can make a world of difference. It is something that I think I do really well. I love to have things on my desk, not only my painting supplies, but things that really speak to me. As I'm recording this episode, I'm looking over to the right of my desk, and maybe I'll even share a photo. But I have some watercolor pieces that I painted yesterday, which was Sunday, and I spent the whole day in my studio painting pretty much. But beside my area where I'm painting, I have a few sprigs of a hydrangea clipping that I clipped from the garden that's now dried out in a beautiful vintage vase that I bought secondhand that sits in a wooden bowl made from reclaimed wood. So I look to surround myself with things from nature. I love vintage, so I have vintage vessels and containers that I use to not only hold flowers, which I use as painting inspiration, but they also hold my sketching pencils, my brushes, and things like that. I have candles that I light. Again, it creates an ambiance. And also, if I have some really brightly scented candles, it puts me in a really relaxing mood. I typically have, for sure, a hot coffee. on my desk or just something to drink and just to give me a moment if I'm kind of needing a break from what I'm working on. So, creating an inspiring environment really can make a difference. So, if you're maybe not able to work in a dedicated space, I do have a space in my home that is my studio. I'm very lucky to have it. But maybe what you can do is buy a vintage desk, secondhand. Facebook Marketplace is great. Or find a little cozy nook where you can set up a table, have a really comfy chair, because we need to make sure we protect our back and our necks, and be able to leave out your watercolor supplies. And I'm talking about watercolor because that's my thing. So I do paint with acrylic and oils, but I feel like sometimes the setup and the cleanup takes away from my painting practice. If I'm using watercolor or even working with charcoal and pencil, I can just put everything down and walk away. I don't need to worry about cleaning up. Now, if you have cats, maybe that's a problem, or if you have young kids, you want to be able to put your supplies away. That's totally fine. But having them in maybe a dedicated basket or in a really pretty box so that you can put them away really easily can help with that. So, again, make sure your space is comfortable, you have some good lighting, but beside a window is my best suggestion and my preference. But if you have maybe a table light that isn't casting over top of your desk, maybe just creating some ambient lighting to the side of your desk, that's best. And that way you don't get that glare from the harsh light onto your watercolor paper. And also, again, thinking about our neck and backs, making sure your desk and your chair is at the right height so that you can paint for longer periods and really just protect your neck and shoulders and back. Trust me, I am someone who suffers from migraines. So making sure I'm in the proper posture will mean that I can sit and paint longer and not suffer after. So I talked a little bit about gathering your materials and having your supplies handy. Sometimes, if we are short for time and we want to be able to focus on dedicating a time to a daily practice, gathering materials can cut into that actual painting time. So, what I suggest is to make it simple. I sometimes will look at all of the art supplies that I'm really lucky to have access to, but it can be overwhelming. I don't know if I want to watercolor paint or sketch or maybe even collage. And as someone who is multi passionate and express my art using different forms and mediums, that can be overwhelming. And sometimes it will actually stop me or hinder me from sitting down and making art. So make your art supplies simple. Grab some very basic supplies. If you are working with watercolor, maybe grab two of your favorite brushes, a large one and a small one. Grab a sketchbook or just a few sheets of paper or your favorite watercolor pad. And I would grab maybe 6 colors max of your watercolor paints, whether they're dry or in tubes. And then, of course, all of the extras that we need, like a paper towel and a jar. All of those things can fit into a little basket. And if you want some visual examples of that, I actually have a section in my book, Watercolor Made Simple, where I show you how to really pack very simple art supplies, have them in a basket, and maybe even have them sitting in your living room so you can sit at your coffee table. Sometimes I literally sit on the floor in front of my coffee table while watching a show and I'll just sketch and paint. And that means that I have time to practice. And the beauty of that type of practice is I'm not putting a lot of thought or pressure on what I'm creating. I'm just allowing myself to be in the moment and to express my creativity. So keep it simple, make it really easy for the moments when you don't have a lot of time. And that way you can sit and practice and not spend a lot of time gathering or setting up your art space. Okay, so let's build some time into your routine. So, again, thinking back to that 100-day practice, I cut down 100 sheets of things like watercolor paper, sketching paper, and even recycled vintage paper from old books that I took apart. I cut them all down to a 4 by 6 size. I labeled each and every one, starting with day 1, day 2, day 3, and so on. and they were random. So the paper dictated whether I used a dry medium or my watercolor paints. And then every morning with my morning cup of coffee, that's typically the time that I'm more relaxed. My creativity is flowing. The house is quiet. I have energy and time. Those are, I guess, the big factors. And then I made the size of my substrate really small so that it was manageable and sort of in a bite sized chunk where I could sit down. Again, the decision of what medium was already made based on the paper I was pulling out for that day. I already labeled it with the day so I knew which day I was on. And that even inspired me, knowing like when I got to day 30, that's usually when I would drop off the 100-day project challenge. But knowing what day I was on was helpful, and then knowing that it was just a really quick, small sketch that I could add as little or as much detail to in the medium of choice. That really made establishing a schedule easy for me. If you're someone maybe who likes to paint in the evening, then set aside 15 to 30 minutes a day and see what happens. Make sure you let people know in your family that's what you're doing so they can be supportive of it. And who knows, you might even inspire them to do something as well. So, if it happens that you don't paint that day, or maybe it doesn't work out in your schedule that day, be okay with that. Know that it's okay if you don't actually sit down to paint that day or to create that day. That's totally fine. If you can create a schedule and maybe set a goal to sit down and create 3 to 5 times a week. That gives you a range. And that way, the days that you don't get to create, you don't get so, you're not so hard on yourself and get so down that it stops you from creating the next day. Okay. Be flexible and be okay with it. Give yourself some grace and some room if, your days are busier, if your schedule doesn't allow. So it's again really important to set some realistic goals. And I know I talked about that a little bit when talking about establishing a schedule. When I again made the goal of practicing a portrait every day, I was very specific. So I knew it was going to be portraits. I had some visual examples already queued up, went to Unsplash. It's my favorite royalty free website that I can use for references for things that I want to sketch and paint. And again, making the page really small, so 4 inches by 6 inches is not big at all. So it allowed me to create a realistic goal of painting every day, knowing that I'm busy, knowing that life gets in the way, knowing that some days maybe I just won't feel like picking up a pencil or a paintbrush. But deciding to complete a really small painting each week or experimenting by using a dry medium or a wet medium made the process and made me a little bit more successful in that process too. So, focusing on the process and not just the end product is also a really great perspective to have as well. And then tracking your progress can be motivating. So, just like I said, when I would pick up that next sheet of paper in my box, of course, it had to be a vintage wooden box. When I picked up that next sheet and it already had day 43 on it, it inspired me, and I was really excited to share it. I shared the process on social media. I didn't share every day, but I shared the process on social media too, because I kind of felt proud that I was being consistent. I'd never been that consistent in my art practice before. So I don't use a calendar to mark my painting days, but you can. You can maybe schedule it, add a reminder to your phone. There's so many different apps and trackers. Maybe you want to do it that way. Or what I love to do is the good old fashioned my date planner. I handwrite everything, all of my appointments, my to-dos, my projects. I love to connect with pen and paper. It's just my thing, but maybe technology will work for you. Maybe you want to have a calendar, whatever works for you. Just set realistic goals. Don't make it feel like there's a lot of pressure around it. Make it easy, and you'll see that you'll have more success that way. Okay, so let's chat about some common challenges you might face. And I know we have days where things just feel a bit harder. Maybe you're feeling creatively blocked. Maybe you don't know what you want to paint or what to draw or what to work on. Some things you can do is have a visual reference. So, again, I use things like my artist project planner to just stick in some ideas, maybe create some thumbnail sketches. I clip out images from magazines, maybe for watercolor palettes that I want to try. Look at maybe doing something creative versus working on a painting. And then that will help the creative juices flowing so that the next time you sit to paint, you already have some ideas brewing. You can again work on some thumbnails or some quick ideas. Maybe you even want to just do some color swatching or allow yourself to just pick up a pencil or your watercolor pencils and make some creative marks and see what happens. That sometimes, that allowing of just releasing the pressure when you're feeling a creative block is a really great way to, again, relieve the pressure from having to create that day. Maybe even pick up a book. Maybe you purchased an art book or a creative book that you love. Pick up the book, flip through it, and have um, the imagery, the words, the colors inspire you. And that's your creative expression for the day. Because sometimes it's not always doing, it's the consuming that can spark an idea, or you can be inspired by something that you've experienced and seen. Okay. So being creative daily doesn't necessarily mean you have to do something. Just be in that mode of receiving can really inspire your next creative idea when you sit down to paint next. Okay, so on the theme of having a creative block and maybe not knowing what to do, I think sometimes we sit down and think this, page in my sketchbook needs to be perfect. It needs to be beautiful. And sometimes maybe that feeling or that expectation will stop you from just being playful and creative in your sketchbook, for instance. I think that feeling of perfectionism is a hurdle many artists face. I know that even creating this podcast, I probably have mixed up my words in this episode. It probably isn't edited perfectly, but if I worried about being perfect and not sharing it, I wouldn't be able to share this with you. So think of that in your art practice. If you're specifically, I'm thinking about a sketchbook right now because there's a lot of pressure working in a bound book and feeling like every page needs to be beautiful. If you can get over that feeling of perfectionism and just sit down and think, I want to add color to this page, or I want to add sketchy marks to this page and see what happens, then you'll enjoy that practice even more and maybe even flip the switch and learn how to embrace the imperfections. And again, I've talked about we learn so much more from things that don't go well than things that do go well and easy. So embrace the imperfections because they sometimes can lead to some really interesting outcomes that will inspire you to explore that technique again and again, that layering, maybe that color mixing. Remember, as artists, we're curious. And it's all about exploring. So give yourself that freedom to experiment, to explore, to be curious, and to grow. Okay, so flip the switch on feeling like you have to be perfect and every art session has to be perfect. And think of it as just an exploration of creativity and curiosity. Okay, so let's talk about maybe sharing your artwork with others. So, something fun you can do is invite other people into your creative practice, whether it's, sharing on social and maybe asking someone to be an accountability partner. Maybe it's sitting down and connecting in person and painting with a group. That can happen once a week, maybe once a month in between your daily practices in your home studio or in, the cozy corner in your living room, whatever that is. When you find a supportive creative community who can offer you feedback and who you can be inspired by, that sometimes can spark energy so that you can be more consistent in your personal or art practice. Maybe local art groups, they're a fantastic way to engage with others and share your experience. And again, sometimes it's not the doing, it's the receiving. So, as artists, again, we give so much of ourselves. But if you can be in receiving mode in a creative community, there's nothing wrong with that because we all will give and receive and give and receive. And that energy and that exchange won't always be balanced. But if you can be in a more of a receiving mode, the receiving of energy, of advice, of support, that will fuel your creative practice. And I'm not going to guarantee it, but for sure, it will make you want to sit and paint more. Okay, so maybe look for a way to connect, whether it's online or in person, and let that fuel your routine and your daily practice. Okay, so let's wrap this up a little bit with documenting. So I am a big believer of keeping your paintings for a long time. If you're selling your artwork and you're maybe gifting your artwork, you can probably relate, but it's, having to hold on to your pieces for a bit to allow yourself time to observe, to allow yourself an opportunity to keep a timeline of the art that you've made maybe over the last few years and holding on to it a little bit so that you are certain and you're ready to part with it, but also dating your pieces. So if you're working a sketchbook, maybe every so often just write the date that you are working on a page. If not, do it daily and just use that as a timeline so that you can look back on where you started or at different points in your journey, because that can be inspiring. But what I also like to do is also write down things that I've used. So whether they're color mixes or techniques, and I almost keep it as like a painting journal. So I'll write down again, maybe what was my inspiration, where I was when I took a photo, if I'm working from my own references. I like to also paint images that I took when I am traveling and on a trip. So it almost becomes like a travel journal for me or a diary that I like to look back on. And again, just remember the moment that I was in when I painted, because you'll find that you will, even if you forget that experience, having it in your sketchbook specifically and looking back on it, it acts as a reminder of that moment you were in, that place you visited, how you felt, what colors you were into, because that will change and evolve as you grow as an artist. So making sure you document and you keep track of not only your progress, but also what you're using, what supplies you're most into at that time can be really interesting, but it also serves as a thing to help you paint or focus on when you're kind of feeling that creative block that we talked about and you're not sure what to paint or what to work on. Those sketchbook pages can be an inspiration. So instead of again looking outward and maybe watching a tutorial and needing that tutorial to push you to paint something next, you can look at your own sketchbook practice and have that determine or inspire you for what you want to paint next. It's really powerful. So if you can look inward more for things to paint, colors to use, etc., that will allow you so much more freedom and empower you as an artist. Try it and let me know what you think. Okay, I feel like this was a nice, long, juicy episode that had lots of tips and ways that you can start painting daily, create a routine that can help you not only boost your skills as an artist, but help your mental health. It can help foster creativity, can even help inspire others to be creative and focus on their art. And as always, let me know what you think. I encourage you to start today, pick up your brushes, make your space, find a few minutes, and just paint. And no pressure, just enjoy the process and make a note of what happens. I'd love to hear about your journey. Share your experiences on social media, reach out to me via email. And next week, I'll be sharing a little bit more about my process of creating my very first book, what I learned, the things that I've included, maybe even some things that you didn't notice, and how it can help your watercolor practice. Okay, so thank you again for tuning into this episode of Life I Design, the podcast. I appreciate your support, and I hope you feel inspired to pick up that paintbrush. Remember, creativity is a journey, not a destination. And if you are looking for more things to paint and to work on, I welcome you to join me in Watercolor Made Simple, my online classes, or pick up my new book, Watercolor Made Simple. I have so many free painting sessions that we are working on as we are in the anniversary month of my very first traditionally published book. So I want you to paint more. Join me, and I will see you next time.